The vehicles were quickly disabled. Even increased protection did not protect them from an accurate hit from an RPG. The state envoy got out of his car. He could not believe that such madness could happen. If the virus spreads in the city center, it will be a real tragedy, and they were not exactly destroyed by the government. Researchers puzzled over a new problem for humanity because the virus attacked the heart and brain, avoiding other areas. Various diagnostic methods showed that the disease kills the human brain. One of the scientists asked to get him pictures. A young scientist, somewhat reminiscent of a character from the manga Tokyo Avengers, supported his colleague. It is not easy to recognize what exactly happened to the body, because the changes are quite specific and contradictory. One of the scientists really understands the issue, but even he finds it difficult to say anything unambiguously. The professor suggested doing tests and then returning to the discussion. If the mage healer Kiaru had been with them, everything would have been different. However, despite the doubts of a more experienced specialist, the young man believes that the first diagnosis was made correctly. Even though the patient's body was outwardly in good condition, the internal injuries were serious, but he still moved his fingers. The assistant suggested that the virus was poorly studied. There was a high probability of encountering some kind of critical bug, like in Dota after the patch. Before the team went about their business, the young specialist drew attention to a poster with prevention instructions. It contained many useful rules that will definitely help in the current situation, whether everything is really so serious. Even though by all indicators the patient's brain was dead, he continued to show signs of life. This phenomenon is no less mysterious than the plumbus. The virus was given the name ARS-24. The first cases of infection occurred several years ago, but it did not get off the ground. Previously, the rate of development and spread of this mysterious disease was not so high, but now everything has become much more dangerous. Doubts about the orders of his superiors were mixed with thoughts about how the magic battle would end. Then, in response to his subordinate's misunderstanding, the professor said that some reflexes remain even after brain death. In addition, although they took a step towards a new look at the ARS-24 virus, almost anything could happen. It was already visible earlier, but the patient's finger was moving. His hand gradually took the shape of being sharpened under the armpit, so he is a true gamer. The daily routine was quite simple. They watched and studied, no action or fun. But this time the situation took an unexpected turn. It seems that changes began in the condition of the guy in the ward. Following someone with cameras became common even after the FNAF series of games, but every moment in this situation was important. We are transported several hours ahead. The patients are lying in the ward. Their condition is stable, but they are not moving. Suddenly, several employees enter the room, probably wanting to get some samples or administer some medicine. Two guys, as if they had escaped from lethal company, approached the first sick person. They checked the IVs and took several measurements. Noticing movement in one of the nearby beds, an employee in a white jumpsuit approached to check the man's condition. However, unexpectedly for the workers themselves, the man, who was unconscious a couple of minutes ago, attacked the scientist. When the second man tried to help his colleague, the patient attacked him and it looked like it was time to open Zombieland. Noticing something was wrong, several more people hurried into the room. Probably the virus had progressed to the next stage. 3 employees somehow managed to hold the monster and save their nakama. Staring in one direction, the red-eyed one stood motionless. After a few minutes, interference began, about the same jokes YouTube sometimes gives out when it switches the resolution. Gradually increasing interference completely blocked visibility. It was impossible to find out what was happening inside from the outside. Meanwhile, we are transported to the surface. The abandoned city seems completely gray. Nothing betrays what life bought here earlier. The long-abandoned streets directly reminiscent of the atmosphere of the first part of The Last of Us, nature, and the legacy of time. On the destroyed streets and in houses, you can find the consequences of various tragedies. Some were running too slowly, and others were unlucky enough to be locked up. The research institute, located somewhere in the forest, seemed much calmer. There were even people present. This was the destination of that same professor. Something serious must have happened because he looked like he was in a hurry. According to him, such centers are better in nature and not in the realities of the urban jungle. He probably went through a lot of survival with zombies. Chung Yu-hyun, that's the name of the head of the Department of Internal Infectious Diseases. He tried hard to find a cure. The guy who meets his brother in the parking lot is named Choi Woo-sik. He is an ordinary 4th grade clerk. They all collaborated to more effectively find a solution, because in their world there are no SCPs that could help with this. Brunet was interested in one of the cases of infection. One susceptible to ARS-24 escaped, and the search for him began. However, for some reason, high-ranking people ordered the search to be called off without giving a reason. This made the main character very angry, because the consequences of such a decision could be terrifying, as if someone had downloaded cheats on Plague Inc. Even though everyone who was infected was on the wanted list, it was absurd to remove them from there so easily. True, there was relatively good news. The same patient, his condition had changed, this could help them. The patient's symptoms, part kaite, indicated that he was dead, but other indicators showed the body's activity. In other words, the man behaved as if infected with the T virus. His aggressiveness gradually grew and was difficult to control. This is really hard to believe. The young man himself understood this. It was the task of other units to prevent information leakage. If people find out about what is happening now, many will really be scared. Now aggression is the only serious symptom. The process always followed the same scenario. They should have followed the safety rules because this might not be the end. The escaped patient was under the responsibility of Jung Yu-hyun, so now it's more difficult for him to figure it out than the helicopter mission from GTA. The search was not going to be easy, so Commander Kim Song-tae, an experienced military man with excellent intuition, arrived to provide support. It seems that the main character's brother treated other people much more kindly than our Hen. The young man was not very happy with the way things were, but the situation was serious. It was better to avoid the hardcore fashion this time. Communicating with the military man, it became clear, when the search operation would begin, the main character was interested in how many people they had. To Hen's surprise, more than 100 people were involved in the case, each of whom was an excellent specialist and could cope with any situation. The blonde thought that this amount would be too much, although perhaps it was, on the contrary, not bad. Seeing the concern in the eyes of the main character's brother, the man wanted to rickroll him, but the young man did not fall for it. Regardless of the opinion of the scientist and the clerk, people have been allocated to them, and it is worth using this opportunity to the maximum. Realizing that this was perhaps the most effective method of solving the problem, the blonde decided not to argue with the military man. If necessary, the lieutenant colonel, who looked suspiciously like Hughes, was ready to train the brothers. The main character still had plans, so he suggested meeting later with all the squads. Even if the lieutenant colonel came to the rescue, this decision seemed extremely suspicious to Hen. Probably the government wanted to know about everything firsthand. A little later, all the people involved were gathered in the square. One would think that these were Chinese raiders from the Rastas. But no. Before going on a dangerous operation, the scientist and his brother were given instructions and also asked to check the equipment. The plan was quite simple. Initially, only a detachment consisting of scientists and researchers should enter, followed by the rest. Having been distributed among the squads, the operation could be declared to have begun. It is a pity that they did not have a portal gun. There was a long road ahead to the mountain. The researchers slowly moved forward, not expecting to meet anyone. The young man's brother was pretty tired. He was not used to life outside his office or home. Since the guy even spent his vacation at home playing new games on the Xbox, Hen did not miss the opportunity to tease him. The guys standing behind them looked quite terrifying. They smelled of anger and some kind of foreboding. All our boy hoped for was that the operation would take place without any unnecessary problems, and they would separate sooner. Approaching the entrance to the city, the main character froze as if the same ghost from the old games of the Pokemon series had appeared in front of him. There was something that appealed to his fear. His intuition told him not to go further, but it was impossible to stop for long. Turning to his brother, Hen asked whether he had often been in these circles before since he worked very close by. Woo-sik actually sometimes walked along the local streets. Then the main character asked how many pets there were. In such places, there were always a lot of chocobos, chickens, dogs, and cats, far from quiet animals. But now there was not even a sound in the city. This was a very bad sign, ignoring which could cost their squad many lives if they made a decision. No matter how carefully the main character and his brother listened to the ambient of the city, there was nothing but the howling of the wind. At this moment, Woo-sik really thought the atmosphere was as depressing as in the second Silent Hill. Looking around the troops behind him again, Hen was thinking about what to do next. It was dangerous to go forward. Even though the village looked deserted on the outside, inside they could find anything if they kept their concentration. It could be like mold or creatures more terrible than some headcrabs or alliance soldiers. While Hen was telling the blonde about this, he noticed a strange silhouette in the distance, gradually moving upward. Seeing his brother's worried face, the main character turned his head in the same direction, preparing for the worst. Just a few tens of meters away from them, a bald man was walking. It was not clear whether he was on their side or whether he was an enemy. While in this city, as was said at the beginning, they are spinning the Yogg-Saron roulette, and there is not much chance of survival in it. We are transported back a week. A monthly meeting is held at which Hyun is scheduled to speak. The report told us about the same patient who appeared at the beginning of the story. It was he who disappeared from the hospital. Despite the fact that the guy was brain dead, his appetite and mobility did not disappear, quite the contrary. Like Kaneki during a long fast, the patient was constantly faced with bouts of aggression. It was no longer possible to predict the actions of this creature. Like a maddened beast, it attacked everyone. Secondary infections from someone with ARS-24 would have the same symptoms, so things were looking bad. Until this moment, it was difficult to predict exactly what consequences would accompany the escape. But one thing was clear. Once you learned parkour, trying to communicate by radio with the detachment located in the medical center, where the forces for this campaign were being formed, the blonde took out a walkie-talkie. The guy transmitted the data. 50 meters away, there was another infected person, most likely aggressive and hungry. The center asked if the first infected person had been found, but unfortunately for them, it was another patient. The main character's light bulb went off. The lieutenant colonel told the protagonist's brother that he was monitoring the situation and would not allow any problems for their group. It seemed that even the affable-looking, bespectacled military man was also pursuing his own personal motives or the motives of someone higher in rank. The protagonist's thoughts were filled with whether he would have to fight on the intellectual front with the lieutenant colonel. Everything said that they were not allies, which means that it was worth preparing for the friendly fire. The conversation on the radio continued. However, Woo-sik quickly realized what a mistake he had made when the call provoked the monster to pay attention to them. The monster quickly turned his gaze towards the squad. He looked like a parasite from a simultaneous anime, although he did not swing his blades. Realizing that things smelled like trouble, the main character and his brother took refuge behind the wall as quickly as possible. But Hen didn't understand why they should hide if they found what they actually came here for. Then the blonde began to argue with him. As soon as the guys turned on the stealth mode, they were not only able to steal a healing potion from the shop, but also past the monster. Stepping forward, the creature did not even give a chance for anyone to suspect something was wrong, almost like an ordinary person. Not wanting to miss such a valuable sample, the longtime hero began to slowly move forward in order to later capture the target. Realizing that the brunette will not stop if he decides to do something, Woo-sik decides to provide him with all-powerful support. The guy also gives orders to other soldiers to follow them, because now this is a priority task. While they were gathering their strength, the monster, just like a runner from Dying Light, disappeared from visibility with deft movements. Having walked a few meters forward, the group managed to find the infected person's lunch, the corpse of a small domestic animal. The marks on the poor creature's body indicated that it was either eaten by a flower with teeth, or it was a person. The only thing that was certain was that they had greatly underestimated the virus when they went searching today. The guys, who had kept an icy silence until that moment, could not withstand the tension. They also became a little scared. The main character also asked all his people to keep their eyes open, because here the monster's attacks have an additional modifier. Any damage from infected organisms will likely result in infection, even if all symptoms are unknown. But even so, the young man believed that, in addition to aggression, there was something else unusual behind this incredibly terrible problem. Suddenly, the ground under our feet began to shake violently, much like in the movie Jurassic World when Rex approached. In their situation, the vibrations indicated that the infected person who had escaped decided to call his friends, after which they would have dinner with them. The main character gave the command not to panic, but hardly anyone else listened to him carefully. A crowd of monsters ran towards them. The Cabaneri from the abandoned village reached their goal faster than the researchers could understand anything. At the same time, a man, adjusting his jacket, slowly approached the car, his behavior betraying concern. He slowly climbed into the back seat of the car, sighing heavily as he did so. The man was almost as loud as Coach from Left 4 Dead. This man's name was Kim Hae-sang. He was the director of the Department for Combating Various Diseases. The man who met him inside was the resident commissioner for disease control, and he was glad to see him again. The second man was much calmer, as if nothing was happening, but in fact the news was quite alarming. He was interested in why the course of the operation was changed without the permission of the command. Apparently the man had never encountered zombies. The situation took a rather bad turn at that moment. Despite the preparedness of the soldiers, the level of their enemy and his stats were higher. The search for one mutant ended with them stumbling upon an entire infected village. It could serve as a new map for the ZM mode in CS. One of the workers at the Disease Control Center asked a colleague if he understood who was now in the forefront risking their lives. Kim Hee-sang was amazed after opening the album handed to him a little earlier. It seemed like he understood who he was talking about. This squad was exclusively engaged in special tasks of high difficulty, something like CP0 from One Piece. Their presence in this kind of operation, even with a high risk of encountering something unknown, forced many questions to be asked. Most likely, since Squad 707 is present on this mission, one of the VIP participants intervened and made this decision. It wasn't just one strange thing they encountered, so if someone powerful was behind it, that might explain everything. Park Tae-sik asked his colleague to be extremely careful, because it was necessary to find out what was going on. We will be transferred to another place again. This time it all starts with a call from a beauty still unknown to us. Oyeri picks up the phone. She is somewhat reminiscent of Teeny's sister from a recent anime. The girl was a detective who was also involved in the search. While others were in relative peace, the situation in which the main character found himself could hardly be called such. Fighting was not something Hen was definitely good at, but he could get a D without any problems. The young man called out to his brother to hurry up and convey the seriousness of the situation to the other units, but was taken by surprise. The monster, just like Barnacle, grabbed the guy and didn't want to let him go. One of the soldiers intervened in time. This stranger was a representative of Unit 707. Despite the situation, his face exuded only confidence and despondency. After catching his breath a little, Hen made sure that his brother and the other people were all right, but the rest was by no means short-lived. Another infected person, whom they had not seen before, was quickly rushing towards them. He was larger and stronger. Without strong magic, you could hardly defeat him. The main character asked Woo-sik to deal with the wounded by organizing evacuation for them, while he himself planned to enter the battle. The monster rushing towards them did not try to feint or move in any unpredictable way, so the young man had many chances. For the first time, Hen was glad that as a child his father forced him to take martial arts instead of violin. Even though the brain was no longer functioning, a strong blow to the jaw or neck could be extremely effective against these creatures. Despite their numbers, not many of the zombies were fast. They were more like monsters from The Walking Dead. The detachment took up a perimeter defense in order to protect those who were attacked and damaged. It was necessary to gain some time. While interacting with one of the victims, Woo-sik took various actions in an attempt to provide effective treatment to the patient. The bitten researcher felt a severe headache, as if he had returned to the time when he played Skyrim for several nights without a break. The emerging symptoms did not indicate that the manifested behavior would soon be replaced by aggression and the desire to eat someone. But while Woo-sik administered the medicine, the defense line could not stand it and let one infected person go ahead. This could have been a fatal mistake. This zombie, like a 2-star wolf from Valheim, was too close at the moment when the blonde was relaxed. The one who attacked the clerk was one of the researchers, which means that this variation of the virus affected the body much faster. The first infected just lay unconscious for days, eating food and gradually showing aggression, but now the conversion is happening so quickly. The situation was still difficult. They did not have the opportunity to deal with all the attackers quickly and without any risk. However, the same girl came to the rescue in time. Oyeri appeared at just the right time, making brutality for a couple of zombies with a car. There was not enough time to explain the situation in detail, so the young man said a few words regarding the horror they faced. The girl came to the rescue on the orders of the director. She was in a hurry and it seemed not in vain, but everything that was happening looked like some kind of Resident Evil. The only thing is that they didn't have the same rich arsenal as the heroes of the game, but the atmosphere was quite similar. The impact of the car was not enough to completely knock down the dead man, so we had to help the girl with an unexpected problem. The same 707 squad came after the researchers. The trained special forces were even strong enough to defeat Hanma Baki. It was difficult to believe what was happening, so Woo-sik was a little shocked. He didn't understand how he should react. After 30 minutes of the search operation, the researchers still had not contacted their superiors. The director and the commissioner were very worried about this, because they even sent Oyeri to the rescue, but they were distracted in time by Woo-sik. The blonde called his management. He explained that things had taken a bad turn, just like during Sarah's Victoria's first appearance. If it were not for the soldiers, they would not have been able to cope with those who were susceptible to secondary infection. Zombies have high strength. Among them were those who were exposed to the third round of infection with the virus. They will also be under observation. However, despite this, the desired man, local Aklex Mercer, was not found among the infected, which means they failed the search. It was difficult to believe in this because the village is very small, which means that a 2-meter giant could not hide. Woo-sik promised to examine the village again. The authorities ordered this time not to lose people at all. Disease control chiefs would like to get rid of a virus like this quickly, before it becomes a global problem. The blonde also reported that the military was planning to take away about 40 infected people. They probably had better laboratories than those in the forest. At this moment, The lieutenant colonel was just convincing the main character to transfer those infected with a secondary infection under his responsibility. The disagreements were quite serious. The professor was not going to agree to the military conditions, but an agreement still had to be reached. The commissioner did not want to understand why the army was showing such interest in this situation, but they must take the main prisoner. I also noticed strange things, the director added. Probably the military is not their allies, they are only pursuing their goals here. However, since Detachment 727 was sent to clean up, which could even cope with a couple of maniacs from Dead by Daylight, they are powerless. The difference in forces could be seen even with the naked eye, so it was impossible to enter into open confrontation. As they headed to their destination, many of those involved in the search operation reflected on what had happened. In one of the cars, there was an active discussion of the main character and his behavior. Unlike the others, he did a good job. One of the group members noted that the professor's skills were of a high enough level that he could be mistaken for a soldier. Everyone was skeptical about the zombies and their behavior, because if all the infected were like this, it would be easy to defeat them. Heading in a straight line as a convoy, it was strange that one of the trucks suddenly veered off course. The soldiers immediately decided to report this to the head of the operation, Hen. The guy wanted to ask an expert from their group about this. However, turning around was a serious mistake. It seems the guys forgot about the basic rules of survival in a zombie apocalypse. Even one mistake cost them an incredibly high price. It seems that no one will leave the car uninfected. Around the same time, the main character was heading about his business along the expressway. One of the specialists called him. It was worth preparing for the arrival of the infected, otherwise the populated area would fall. The only advantage was the opportunity to play days in real life. You can't relax, even if you see the low speed and relative simplicity of movements. Zombies are taken in numbers and surprise. Before they find themselves surrounded by those they cannot trust, the protagonist wanted to know his brother's opinion. Woo-sik, like Hyun, was suspicious of the army. Their actions could hardly be called help. They were definitely up to something. Of course, these people were very supportive, but even so, it didn't seem like they really wanted to find the virus for them. All the guys from Squad 707 didn't even raise an eyebrow at the infected person, as if each of them was Agent 47 on minimum wage. Realizing that they shared the same point of view, Woo-sik became a little calmer, but he wanted to resolve this situation quickly. The blonde was also surprised that he reacted quite calmly. Of course, he had previously seen the attack on cameras, but earlier he would have been as scared as the protagonist of the Diary of the Future, or even much more scared than he was. The young man was pulled out of his thoughts by a phone call. He asked his brother to wait a little, something important had probably happened. The stranger called Woo-sik. It was not the researcher, but someone else, after which it became known about what happened to the car. It seems that what happened greatly affected the blonde, so the guys went straight to the hospital. The main character pressed on the gas with all his might. The situation affected Woo-sik greatly. He was beside himself with anxiety and anger, and at the reception he began to question the manager. Before the brunette could give her answer regarding Brother Hen's request, a doctor approached them from behind and asked them to follow him. He agreed to help this time, but this was a one-time opportunity, so the young men should not feel special. On the way to the patient, the attending physician reported that things were worse than dates after the fight with the world lightweight champion. The accident was terrible, so the damage can cause huge changes in the lives of the victims. They will probably not be able to serve. One was lucky to remain in a poor but stable condition, while the other guy suffered a serious lung injury. The situation was quite dangerous, but the doctors did everything possible to save the patients they received. There were more people in the car, so not everyone managed to emerge unscathed after this scrape. It was worth driving more carefully. What exactly happened was unknown, since there were no survivors and there were no CCTV cameras there. The main character decided to check if one undead unluck was hiding among them. Lifting the blanket, he was amazed by what he saw. There were several photographs taken by the 119 team at the scene of the accident. The front and rear of the car were almost completely destroyed. There were also several strange moments in the pictures, but the doctor could not give any comment on them. Sitting in the main hall, Hen wondered if his brother had told anyone else about this news. A little upset, Woo-sik replied that he only managed to inform the director, and the guy also contacted the police through Oyeri. The phone found did not contain contacts of relatives. Most of the victims had no one left. The main character wondered if this was really an accident, or if their limit of luck had been exhausted and it was a setup. It was not easy to figure this out, and besides, Brother Woo-sik was on tilt, even more powerful than the main characters of Evangelion at the end. Thinking about the photographs, Hen came to the conclusion that everything was a setup. In fact, there were 2 accidents. The blonde's anger continued to increase. He asked whether those military could really do such a thing because of their reluctance to give up the infected. Woo-sik assumed that this was the only way it could have happened. If it wasn't just an accident, the lieutenant colonel was probably involved in this. After listening to his brother, the main character asked him to speak a little more quietly. Now they don't need unnecessary gossip and conversations. Now nothing was known yet. There was no point in blaming someone so early, so Hen asked his brother to keep his thoughts to himself for now. If everything was really planned and someone finds out that the guys guessed it, there will be an epic fail. Depending on who exactly their enemies are, each person could potentially be suspicious. This was by no means an easy problem, so Hen asked his brother to keep his anger percentage in the middle for now. But even though a loved one asked for this, Woo-sik could not restrain his emotions. He was very upset by what happened. The day turned out to be very stressful, so the blonde decided to leave to call his wife and calm down a little. As soon as the young man was left alone, his thoughts were completely filled with what to do next and what step would not cause losses. The soldiers had a lot of different equipment, which many had never even seen before. If the leadership was involved in this, everything is sad. Then everything gradually began to take shape. Those whose disappearance almost no one would notice were gathered into the detachment. However, this could really be just a coincidence. The guy didn't have enough evidence to activate the detective mode. The main character did not have his own personal butler like Watari, so he would have to search for information and connect it on his own. A little later, the blonde himself returned. He suggested taking a little rest. Probably now this would be the best decision. However, the main character did not hear Woo-sik. Collecting data piece by piece, the guy began to see certain coincidences. He asked his brother how much time had passed since the end of the search operation. Then the blonde replied that about 6 hours. Even though Hen hasn't shared his insight yet, it looks like he managed to figure out something useful, and he'll probably be able to solve this problem. 6 hours earlier, a soldier reported the capture of a person infected with primary infection. They captured him alive. It seems that the lieutenant colonel turned out to be not as good-natured as he initially looked. He was playing his behind-the-scenes game like a ringmaster. The soldier asked what their actions would be if they encountered the infected, but the commander said that they would soon leave the place. There was nothing more to do here. If they managed to capture that same escaped infected person, they could return to the base. To ensure the effectiveness and secrecy of the mission remained absolute, the lieutenant colonel ordered the disposal of unnecessary evidence. Returning to the base, the military man received recognition from the VIP himself because he perfectly completed the task assigned to him. Number 1 has been captured until he can break the cage, so he is in a safe place. Everything that was happening seemed to be a conspiracy of the Masons. Otherwise, the secret games around the first infected person were very dangerous. One of the people taking part in the trial says that Park Gi-tae is not the real name of the prisoner. In fact, this man is only one of the test subjects selected from among the homeless. A new military development was tested on him. It seems that its effect was more than positive. The strength and threat it exuded was beyond praise. Test subject number 1, who is also the first infected, is the real truth about the mysterious virus that has been worrying the whole world for 3 years now. The injection of this biological weapon gives strength comparable to that possessed by the Hulk, while losing sanity and fear. However, the development was unstable. If you look at the indicators, it was a real miracle that he was alive. As for other degrees of infection, no studies have been conducted yet. There is a high probability of a similar reaction. There is only a difference between the first infected and those who were infected by him later. Others became zombies due to natural infection. As the main character expected, the situation at the top of the government is the same as the Brotherhood at Full Metal Alchemy. If anything from this conversation or the entire project falls into the hands of someone else, it will likely be over. The situation was very tense, but the VIP and the lieutenant colonel left the laboratory, and now the research could continue. Although the result of the experiment satisfied the authorities, the scientist himself felt that in fact it had failed. Having contacted the hospital again, Woo-sik finally understood that the military will not come. Now these people are on their own. If the guys knew about this from the very beginning, they would stream Fortnite instead of working in the army. They feel betrayed. A military hospital near Seoul, where approximately 40 infected people can be located at a time. There were a lot of opportunities and amazing talent there, so if soldiers were transferred there, they probably had a chance. The main character knew people from there, so he wanted to try to negotiate the transfer of patients. However, as soon as they called, Hen realized that everything had turned out for the worst, because even this opportunity was no longer available to them. The employee said that about a year ago, all the doctors were replaced with experienced employees from the academy. Trying to find out information, the guy began to question the soldier, but he did not have a trinket for 10 luck, so nothing came of it. Woo-sik noticed that everything that is happening looks too strange. Probably someone even set it up. If their opponent started making moves a year ago, how far has he advanced now? Then the brother decided to ask about the case when the first infected person escaped from the laboratory. Hen said that the specialists wanted to do a hormonal test during which they were attacked. Probably the results of that test were much more important than the results of those that students take at the end before the final assessment. If the main character's memory did not fail him, the results were exceeded by more than 10 times. Perhaps this was the answer. At the time, it seemed like just a side effect of the disease, but what if there was something more behind these indicators? Before the boys could complete their thoughts and find an answer they could stick to, the doctor called Woo-sik. During the operation, one of the survivors of the accident died. Many doctors who were in the operating room had difficulty enduring this. While the blonde was silently saying goodbye to his friends, the director came to them. He was worried about his guys. The boss asked whether Woo-sik had time to contact the families of the victims, but he said that they were all alone. The commissar also came along with the director. It was hard to believe that so many people didn't even have one relative. The man handed the main character's brother a bank card and asked him to go to McDonald's or bowling and get some rest. This was his combat mission for today. The boss knew how dear these people were to the blonde and that their loss would definitely affect him. The police chief took the blonde man by the hand and said that he couldn't even imagine the young man's pain, but it was their duty to maintain justice. If they can defend their principles and laws of the state, then the death of those who did not reach the end will be justified. While the workers were talking, a girl came into the room. When they asked her what she was doing here, she just waved it off and said that she was on vacation. However, it seemed that she was still not ready to see what she had to face right now. Everything that was happening greatly worried the main character. Probably now, even those whom he had previously called comrade could not be trusted. At 11 p.m. that same day, Korea University Hospital, the main character and his brother continued to work. The main character was a real good-natured person, so he was worried about his brother as well as Oyeri, who also had a hard time. Hen's phone received a call again. It was the guy from the laboratory, who would look like Midoriya Izuku if he had never received a quirk. That night it was the brunette who was on duty, so he asked to check the details of one of the patients. It all happened quite suddenly, but the guy warned his colleague that he shouldn't get involved in this and then gave his name. To the surprise of the main character and his kohai, there was absolutely nothing on Park Kite. No information was preserved at all. The young man himself did not understand how this was possible. Considering how long he had been under their supervision, this meant only one thing. According to the scientist, the man's data remained in the database until funding was terminated, probably after someone deleted it. The professor asked to contact him if anything was found. Even a small piece could have a significant impact. Now there was more evidence. It seems that the escape was not just an accident. Playing Sherlock was quite funny, I think. But even though there is no data left in the common system, no one has access to the protagonist's personal files, which means they definitely remain. The more time passed, the more often the young man asked himself the question of what exactly he forgot in the army. He should leave. How this story will end. If the military was behind the incident, it was obvious what they planned to use these weapons for. Of course, everything that happened was not some cheap zombie action movie, but if everything goes according to the government's plan, anything can happen. Thinking about exactly what effect this weapon has, the guy found one interesting assumption in his mind. Probably this virus allows you to control human hormones. The young man could not understand why he had not thought about this earlier. The more the main character knew, the more likely it was to encounter the inscription, "Game Over." It was worth acting much more carefully. If this had come to light, it is unlikely that the established order would have been preserved. It would be easy to run into trouble at this rate. In their world, HPT chat had not yet been invented, so Hen decided to contact the one who, in his opinion, was number one in matters of working with hormones. A rainy evening is a great time to sleep. In such situations, you don't even need to turn on hours-long videos with the noise of nature. The call from the main character woke up Park Won-sang. The young man asked for forgiveness for calling so late, but the matter was urgent. The blonde warned that if the guy is not brief and does not tell about his problem in 3 sentences, he will hang up. Talking about the Ministry of Defense and its plans, the young man gave the impression of a man who had watched a horror movie. Since the conversation turned out to be too strange and long, the blonde, without a shadow of a doubt, hung up and continued to sleep. However, Hen did not plan to give up so easily, so he called until his friend answered the phone. But since Park Won-sang sent our main character away again, he had to write to him on LinkedIn. The matter was incredibly urgent, so the young man promised to pay the blonde $750,000 for help. The question was extremely specific, so you will have to spend a little money, but it was worth it in the young man's opinion. Trying to support the girl, Hen talked about the memes he had seen recently. Her condition was too depressed. Oyeri insisted that the protagonist stop his investigation because the incident was considered an accident. However, after the young man decided to go so far, there is simply no point in going back, even if the person died. The girl wanted it all to end now. She wanted to bury the man along with his entire story. He deserves peace. Finding an answer to such sensual speech was quite difficult for our Hen, because he, like a real Sigma, does not particularly get along with the female sex. Oyeri herself had no idea what was happening around her. Everything had become too complex and confusing, and there were no answers to the questions. Then the young man took his drink and shared his assumption that they probably know where exactly the infected are located. If they are not in this place, it will hardly be possible to do anything else while in this position. The girl wanted to get information, and then the main character offered to join him. He would soon go there himself. Remembering the quotes from his favorite anime characters, Hen was determined to try until the last minute, until all the clues ran out. The next day, they reached the right place. A difficult mission lay ahead. They had to be prepared for anything. This hospital looked like a fortress to many. They most likely would not be able to enter through the main entrance. Even if they figure out how to get inside, what to do after, once inside, they are unlikely to be welcome guests there. Noticing a car nearby, the guy headed towards it and looked underneath it. Convinced of his guess, he called Oyeri. Yesterday it was pouring rain from about the afternoon until about the middle of the night. But the place under the car is dry, which means it has been standing here all the time since the rain started and has not moved anywhere. This was a good lead, so Batman sent his Alfred to look for the black boxes. They should have been nearby. Any clues were needed that could provide information on how to get inside or where exactly the infected were being kept. Everything around seemed a little suspicious. Making a dummy was not a problem, so it was worth taking a closer look at every line and corner. Observing the surroundings, the professor noticed how a white car with short license plates drove into the hospital territory. The vehicle definitely belonged to a civilian, so who was the stranger driving inside? The number seemed incredibly familiar to the young man. He had definitely seen it somewhere, there could be no doubt. Soon Oyeri returned and managed to find 2 black boxes, although it looked like she was playing Pokemon Go. Studying the collected materials, the main character and his assistant were very saddened by what they had to face. It was not possible to watch the videos. It seems that someone had long foreseen this move of Hen. Realizing that he had again reached a dead end, the young man was amazed at how subtle and skillful his opponent's calculation was, if he could even do that. Everything was done deliberately. The guy violated the system and could not see anything. The truth seemed to pass between his fingers. The only option left was for the young man to call his brother to share with him new news about their case. The main character was with Detective Oyeri, which he informed the guy about. Then the blonde shared the news. The director came to Seoul. It was strange because just yesterday they had spoken with him in the hospital, but most likely he could be trusted. Yesterday Hyun was under impressions, so he could not think of everything. The director himself shared some information with Woosik. The girl, just like we actually don't understand what's happening at all, because the plot has become as strange as possible. There was no point in explaining anything yet. The only thing Hen said was that they had a chance to get new clues. Probably now they are one step closer to getting an answer to the questions that torment them. It could not be otherwise. In the passing car was Hen's ally, namely the blonde man whom he woke up in the middle of the night. To get inside, it was necessary to pass an identity check, because this is still not an ordinary object. However, the young man seemed to already be familiar with the guards. He introduced himself as Park Won-sang, a professor of endocrinology. A little later, Hen made an appointment for Oyeri in a cafe, where the director, who had pressed Monkey King's skill, was already waiting for them. True, his disguise was so terrible that, on the contrary, it was easier to notice him with it. So finding him in an empty cafe was not difficult. He was waiting for him and the girl, so he invited them to sit down and order something, but before that, the guy simply couldn't help but laugh. The main character could not understand what exactly they found if the meeting had to be carried out in person in such a deserted place. Rummaging through his pockets, the man slowly took out a roll of paper and handed it forward straight to Hen. It was a photo of a lieutenant colonel who, with approximately the same level of secrecy, was trying to enter another hospital nearby. It was made on the same day that the first infected person escaped from the laboratory. This cannot be a mere coincidence. The director noted that a strong opponent was playing against them. They were beaten, and they didn't even realize it until it was too late. Not knowing how much Hyun knew, the man tried to tell a little bit at a time, including mentioning VIP. The main character was ready to take such actions that the director did not even dare to dream in his wildest dreams, so he was not sure. It is likely that the senator, but unfortunately not Armstrong, will use this mysterious virus as a weapon, as the young man expected. But if so, it is extremely important to return people infected with the virus. This is a matter of protecting the state after all. If things really are as the man described, then the main character has some ideas about the next step. The appearance of the lieutenant colonel in the hospital could indicate two things. Either he is seriously ill, or he is related to this project. All the evidence against the top management was circumstantial, so nothing should be said with complete seriousness. At the moment, the young man's main goal was to determine who exactly was involved in the project, and if possible, find direct evidence. But before moving forward, you must first pass a security check. Other paths will be even more difficult. According to the director, there were not only many eyes and ears inside, but also army dogs who would definitely find their target. The girl was thinking about how they would pull this off, but the guy asked not to worry, because his genie with 3 wishes was already coming to them. Dr. Joe was willing to provide the camera footage to the professor, which shouldn't have been too difficult. It was too dangerous to talk about his plans now, so the young man promised to show the result later, but for now just trust him. Since Hen will have to get information and only he has access to it now, he will go to the laboratory and his companion will go home. Returning to the office, the main character simply stared into space for some time, succumbing to memories. Thinking about whether cameras and wiretapping could be installed here, the boy struggled with the desire to quickly find out what was happening. Having perked up a little, the guy reached for the phone and was about to make a call when suddenly someone followed him into the room. At this moment, all the worst scenarios that could only come to Hen's head gradually filled his mind. But as soon as he turned around, he realized that it was just a hospital worker who had come to clarify the information. When the young man asked about his colleague Park Won-san, the girl said that he went on a business trip to a foreign institute. Meanwhile, the director had already returned to his car. He was very worried because he clearly said more than was worth it. However, turning his attention to the steering wheel, the man realized that someone had already been sitting in his car while he was waiting for the main character in the cafe. As soon as I noticed this and thought about how far the director had gone this time, someone's long arms reached out for the brunette. The feeling of threat was incredible, as if someone had unleashed royal will. But when he tried to turn around, the man did not notice anyone. He thought that he had reacted this way out of fatigue and fear, but he still couldn't relax even when he was almost home. With every minute of the trip, the feeling that someone was sitting behind and watching only became stronger. It was difficult to withstand such tension. Therefore, having noticed the first parking lot, the director decided to park immediately. He took a stick and was ready to defend himself. But when he opened the back door, he found only emptiness inside. It was difficult for him to believe that this was even possible. Realizing that there was no one behind him all this time, the man had already exhaled and wanted to go home, when suddenly a young man approached him from behind. As soon as he turned around, the brunette noticed a young man standing in a stylish suit. He even stopped breathing for a couple of moments. Needless to say, this was the scariest horror movie of his life, on par with the first Outlast. Having calmed down, the director decided that he shouldn't react so sensitively to everything. The week would end and he would go on vacation. But as soon as the man let his guard down, it quickly became apparent that someone was still hiding inside the car. Perhaps Kim Hae-sang's action was fair, but there were those who really didn't like it, so now it looks like this is the end. The young man standing in front of him radiated a terrifying aura. He was like an Akuma who had found his prey and was about to eat it. It seems that at least until the stranger planned to kill the director, he was interested in answers. He was annoyed that the man began to breathe heavily. He wanted to hear the truth in response to his questions. He asked to convey something to Funduaran. It was worth hearing a few words and then slowly walked to the car. Even though the director was not physically harmed, his mental health was greatly disturbed and he was unlikely to be able to get to work. The stranger turned out to be Kim Tae-pyong, a representative of the national government, and he took the phone from Kim Hae-sang. Talking on the first smartphone, the young man seemed to be talking to his employers. He assumed that the main character would be a threat, but he was assured that Hen was just a doctor, even if he was present during the incident with the infected village. The guy decided to join the game instead of the director. The main condition was reliability and a closed mouth. However, it was not easy to understand the interlocutor, not because Kim Tae-pyong definitely has a chance to become a new hero for a horror film. He was already a member of the organization. He was wiretapped at work and at home. As soon as he hung up the phone, different thoughts began to creep into his head. It was difficult to understand the state of the country when there were so many secrets inside the government and even at its roots. A few hours ago at the Samcheon-dong hospital, something was happening. We don't know what exactly yet, but it was a villainous meeting. The duty commander Lee Jong-boy, who took part in the capture of the first infected person, met with Park Won-sang. The blonde was very worried. It seemed that he did not fully understand what he had gotten himself into, even if it was for decent money. Also with them was a certain Kim Jo-eun, a doctor specializing in human genetics. It is this man who is at the origins of the ARS-24 virus, as well as his world-class pharmaceutical company. It was difficult to be in this environment, because the young man hardly expected to find himself in the clutches of the enemy from the first minute of the mission. Park Won-sang was warned that everything he heard and saw should not leave the confines of these walls, otherwise redemption would be worthy. The doctor has just begun to realize how serious that task turned out to be. After that, he should extract more money from the main character. He will find out later why this information is confidential, as well as whether he will be given a box of mystics. Inside, underground, many famous scientists worked. Each of them had a hand in this project. And now the blonde has the opportunity to enter this round table and begin to work for the benefit of their great power. At every step there were several cameras. Probably they were equipped with a microphone, or there was also an additional wiretap. It was difficult to imagine what exactly was being protected under so many seals, because any unnecessary word could cost the guy his head. The blonde asked if the prisoners were inside, but here they called them experiments. Park Won-sang was led to the first infected person, who became even taller. If he had been less secretive, he could have replaced Murasaki Bara. Since it was the blonde who was in charge of the hormone tests, he feared that he had brought real evil into this world. The power and capabilities of this virus were truly amazing. From a scientific point of view, it is their equivalent of the Philosopher's Stone. After so much time, the blonde still recognized him, the patient whom he and Hen and other specialists were observing. Even then, Park Won-sang became interested in the infected. He could not believe that such situations really existed. Then the main character said that he would like to hear the blonde's opinion as an expert, because the patient's hormone levels were extremely high. Now everything seems to have fallen into place. This is indeed a biological weapon, but of China, and the blonde is needed to repeat their success. Immediately saying that it was impossible to implement such a thing, the man decided to take him to the next sample of secondary infection. The virus was transmitted to a person through the saliva of the first infected person. In turn, this bald, talented young man transmitted the virus to someone else. This weapon is incredibly complex. Each of the infected exhibits its own character traits. Park Won-sang doubted that this could really be achieved through hormones alone. Then the doctor in charge of human genetics said that everything was really like that, and that's why they called the blonde. He was interested in humanity, whether such prisoners were sentenced to death using terms, whether they were Class D. However, the boss reminded them that they are all already infected and they cannot be returned back to society. Now it no longer matters. No matter how it looks, the virus becomes one part with the host's body. They form a connection like the Vartigants. The whole team is discussing exactly how the structure of the virus changes after transmission to the next generation. To put it simply, they want to create an immortal army that will march forward regardless of wounds. The reaction of the blonde himself was somewhat ambiguous. He played along, but understood how everything could end in the worst case. Meanwhile, it seemed that some other group of people were interested in the secrets of this laboratory. There were definitely outsiders here. The main character met his brother. They were sitting on a bench in a peaceful city, living their own lives. It seemed as if this utopia would exist forever. Park Won-sang called them here. It seemed like the conversation was not going to be easy, so the young man decided to show his loved one one little secret before starting. Then the main character opened the box next to them. It contained blood samples from the first infected person taken for testing. They were left for research purposes, but now they are an incredibly dangerous thing, capable of both destroying the world and serving it. Before Woo-sik gets angry, Hyun asked him to wait a little and listen to the brunette's monologue to the end. This is difficult to explain, but Park Ki-tae most likely never appeared as Park Ki-tae. His history is generally vague. Working late last night, the guy not only failed to sell the new treasures on time, but also waited for a call from his friend. After examining the patient's identification card, the assistant came to the conclusion that Park Ki-tae was not the infected with a patient character. Finding information was not easy, but it seems their approach was a little wrong because they were digging in the wrong direction. The situation became more complicated. The likelihood of dying while making your way through the barricades of fakes increased proportionally. The real Park Ki-tae died before meeting the main character, so this person they thought was Park Ki was not him. More than 2 months passed from the moment of death until he was admitted to the hospital, even if the photograph matches. Reflecting on the influx of people during the onset of the virus, the protagonist suggests that it was not easy for a foreigner to get help. In other words, government support during the raging disease was not aimed at Park Ki-tae, which is why he probably died. Immersed in memories, remembering the eyes of the monster he had to face while searching for the operation, the young man understood. There is a high probability that Park Ki-tae arrived as a refugee from China and became homeless. And if this is so, then things are much worse than they initially thought, because the virus does not need to leave the country if it was not created here. Countries dreaming of superiority will not be able to leave everything as it is, because now their country can blackmail China. Many people would like to press this button, just like in the game Don't Touch Anything, but hardly anyone is brave enough. In fact, as soon as all the infected were taken from the army in that village, the incident stopped, which means that the first infected was already captured. Everything is heading towards the fact that the country they have served for so long is turning the infection into a deadly weapon capable of erasing states. Wusik understood that turning a virus into a weapon is somewhat like a blade without a hilt. One mistake and you yourself will suffer. In addition, as the main character noted, the significant problem is that the infected person wants to continue infecting. Initially, this could have appeared due to a mutation, because it is not possible to control something like this. And the place where right now they are making a normally working system out of this crutch is relatively close to here. A version of the new virus causes hormonal changes in the human body, and Park Won-sang is the best hormonal doctor in the world. Although the blonde himself is not a bad person, he is a scientist and is unlikely to refuse help in creating something so innovative. All they can do now is think about the next step, because they missed the one who was previously the carrier of this virus. In other words, using blood saved from clinical trials, they will make a vaccine. The chances of failure were high, but if you didn't take risks, it would be unlikely to achieve the required level of efficiency and quality. The problem was that there was no vaccine company available that the government could not reach. However, it was possible to try to do something so amazing in one institute to which Wusik had access. Now the main character and his brother have to literally fight the government to see if they can really cope. The guy asked his relative not to make a mistake at the last moment. If another bastard is born from the virus, Wusik should become the executioner of doom. The Chinese authorities were not going to sit idly by, and also became active. Their secret branch was located not far from the place of detention number 1. Now, thanks to the efforts and blindness of Korea, the Chinese will be able to get not only their secret development back, but will also receive new data. Probably after escaping, the infected were intercepted by guys from Korea monitoring their facilities. This would explain a lot. Their unwillingness to rush and their high endurance will fully pay off if they manage to get everything back. However, even a country like China will find it difficult to cope with Korean developments in the army. But it was also impossible to watch how your developments were used. You had to wait for the right moment and strike the decisive blow. To work on the vaccine, it was necessary to organize something like a headquarters, but there were not many funds. Therefore, Wusik will have to show the wonders of his acting in order to rent a cheaper apartment near the place they need. Sveg's style and strange requests raised questions from the landlord, so the situation had to be tightened up more and more. Hen and Oyeri, who were watching what was happening, fell out of the game of their nakama. How did he reach his rank? They have to contrive to rent a house without any problems because they are being watched all the time. The main character was not a ninja or a particularly trained fighter, but it was difficult to find the people watching them. A couple of deft moves and head turns showed just how stealthy Hen could be if necessary. Surprisingly, only 2 people were watching them. The guy expected more, especially if they were truly considered a threat. Realizing that they were also being eavesdropped, the guy suggested that his partner use Telegram to communicate. She didn't understand right away, but thanks to the professor's instructions, it wasn't difficult to understand their new strategy. It was suspiciously easy to rent an apartment, and besides, the transaction arrived a day after the purchase. Usually everything happens a little slower. It was stifling from all this guardianship, but it won't be so easy to cope with it because they are literally on their heels. Hen was confident that the strength of humanity lies in unity. No matter who their enemy is, by combining forces they can definitely achieve more. The man behind them, who was definitely watching, pointedly pretended that he had to go. Whoever had been watching all this time on the roof also disappeared from sight, which could mean that even our boy did not understand. Wusik did a lot of work, studying the local market and getting to know typical people. He was ready to resolve issues. Everything in the hospital was also quiet. The blonde did not notice anyone who looked special or suspicious. However, he noticed one strange thing. All those entering into contracts without exception are Koreans, but next to them there is a foreigner. Usually this is someone who speaks Chinese or English. This seemed a little strange considering what was happening within the walls of the hospital. Something is definitely happening, but it is impossible to see it from the system. It was necessary to look at everything more globally. Kim Tae-pyong had some difficulties. It seems that even the main character and his team had a hand in this. His anger at the employee was extremely great, because he was accused of something he didn't do and he wanted to figure it out. A loud sound stopped any disputes. The guys did not immediately understand what exactly had happened, but alertness was increased. The roar came from the hospital nearby. It was something like a strong explosion or maybe an impact. It was worth checking. Having ordered everyone to go there, Kim Tae-pyong also ordered to call the police and the relevant inspections. On the street, everything looked quite sad. He ordered people to check around, maybe they could figure out what exactly happened. As soon as the guy reached the front doors, it became clear how serious the situation was. It looked like someone had carried out a raid. The soldiers on duty were unconscious and covered in blood. The gate seemed to have been knocked out, and various pieces of materials were scattered everywhere. The police squad arrived quite quickly. It was surprising. Perhaps they picked up the hosta not far from the river. They had to prepare. Anything could be expected ahead, so Kim Tae-pyong ordered everyone to keep their weapons ready. Moving forward, they met more and more victims. Conversations could be heard around the first turn, but were they allies ahead? Deciding to take a risk, Kim Tae-pyong identified himself and went out to the soldiers. They recognized the young man from the national park. The military said that the opponents retreated almost immediately after the start of the battle, without much struggle. It was strange. The attackers gave up too easily. Perhaps they already got what they came here for. The young man ordered the soldiers to forget for a while about the basement, which they planned to inspect. First of all, it was necessary to restore communication. After giving instructions, the government representative went to the security room. The communication lines were also damaged too quickly. There was no one in the security room, so Kim Tae-pyong decided to look through the cameras to identify their opponents. It was clear from the video that a car driving along the main road used grenades to destroy the first line of security. Equipment, preparation, and decisions, these were definitely not ordinary bandits, but someone more organized and dangerous. Next, the enemy squad advanced straight to the lower tier. Did information leak through these solid walls, or did they need something else? As soon as they met resistance, the people in black immediately moved in the opposite direction, turning a blind eye to what was happening. It all seemed very strange. Why announce your presence and plans and then leave without any reward? Plus, if the goal was infiltration, using something like an enhanced grenade didn't make much sense. The general staff contacted him on Kim's phone and ordered him to act at his own discretion while waiting for help. If the opportunity presented itself, the employee should have gone to the address sent. It was quite important. Soon, several police cars and a mysterious black one arrived at the scene. One of the cars belonged to Woo-sik and his partner. The main character was also with them. There was no time to hesitate, so they should hurry up and go inside. There was a blonde man inside. He and his escort took the elevator up. Now he understood what it was like to be a tourist in North Korea. He thanked the boss who organized an excursion for him to such a secret and important place in their state. The man in black also told Park Won-sang to come here the next day at 7 in the morning and do this every day. Before the guy left the building, Hen crept up to him from behind and asked if his nakama was coming from that very place. Everything went a little differently than the main character originally planned, but he is glad that his friend finally came to figure it out. To immediately clarify everything, Hen decided to clarify whether all the infected were really underground in this hospital. But what the blonde himself did on the lower floors will be quite a difficult task to explain. However, something else was important now. Number 1 was also here, which means that virtually all the results of the experiment were in one place. This was quite surprising because even after spending so much time, Hen could not find any traces of such a thing. This may seem strange, but all the infected continue to mutate and improve, but now under the guidance of people. Then the blonde also said that each of the subsequent infected is different from the one who infected him. After thinking a little, the main character also decided to share information. Park Ki-tae was previously his patient, but died before they met. Hen hoped that his friend would leave the game, because he had obtained important information, so now there was no need to take risks. But Park Won-sang could not stop. He was confident in his safety, despite the devastating consequences of one mistake. As a scientist, the young man wanted to achieve more, in which case the main character decided to act on this, especially if tomorrow he will go there again. Perhaps the decision to let the guy go when he essentially becomes an enemy seems stupid, but the young man respected the investigative spirit of his colleague. A crowd of onlookers had already gathered before the exit. Hen didn't want to meet them, so he had to look for alternatives. It was lucky that the young man knew about the second exit, but the blonde's appearance showed that he really wanted to take part in it. Suddenly, Hyun's phone rang. He was planning to share the information with his team, so if it was them, the time was right. However, to his surprise, it was neither Woo-sik nor his assistant. He received a call from the hospital, saying that they had an urgent patient. Professor Lee Sun-kyu was not feeling well and was probably going to go into cardiac arrest soon. The main character ordered to closely monitor the situation and, if necessary, quickly take action. Upon Hen's arrival, the situation had already become critical. Taking hold of the device, the guy was ready to resuscitate the patient. The situation was quite problematic because the patient's condition was terribly unstable and there was very little time. But they still managed to bring him back from the other world. Of course, our boy is not the necromancer from Diablo, but he is trained to do real miracles. However, it was too early to relax the third cardiac arrest, and besides, just some time ago he was absolutely healthy. Professor Lin Sun-kyu's test results have finally appeared. He was diagnosed with ARS-24. It seems that controlling everything was not so easy. The infection probably occurred when the professor tried to stop infected number 1 during his escape. Even a small scratch on the fist would be enough to become infected with the virus when touched. Having given his subordinate instructions, enemy Hen decided to take a short breath. The resuscitation had taken quite a long time. One of the assistants, having learned about the young man's contact with Park Kaite, decided to report this to his superiors, so he secretly went away to make a call. The next morning, the number of guards at the entrance was significantly increased, and there were also many guards in the building itself. Yesterday's explosion had serious consequences for them, but they could not relax because his new colleague had come to the young man. Dr. Kim Jo-yoon, responsible for genetics, came to Park Won-sang to inquire about the progress of his work. The research was carried out according to plan, and more importantly, the blonde asked if they should transport the test subjects. Then the guy with the cool hair said that they were actually planning to do this. Even the location had already been chosen. Number 1, as well as other infected people, will be moved to a facility under the Namsan Tunnel. This is definitely a safe place. During his research, Professor Park realized he was missing something really important, so he decided to share now. There is a huge difference between other viruses and infection number 1. The hormones and symptoms are different. There was another difference. Number 1, unlike other monsters, died even before he was injected with the serum. It turns out that this is one of the key differences. For secondary and tertiary infections, such circumstances were not typical. The professor suggested that in a normal situation, the brain is protected from the invasion of the virus and cannot be completely taken under control. However, in the case of the first infected, everything was different. It turns out that ARS-24 was able to get deeper and probably subjugate the internal organs. The guy suggested that if we tested his theory and reincarnated some unemployed person in their world, everything might work out. Then the doctor, Kim Jo-yoon, said that one of the significant differences between this study and others is the ability to try anything. If they need to test this theory, the resources and time will definitely be available, only the exact quantities need to be specified. Everything needed was prepared soon enough. This greatly shocked the blonde, and he was not sure how to cope. A Class D prisoner was placed in the cell with the first infected person so that they could check whether everything was really like that. The doctor respected his colleague because they would really be able to learn something new thanks to Professor Park's idea. Since he was already an accused criminal, they didn't need to worry about the morality of the experiment. It was an extremely cruel experiment in which an equally cruel criminal would become a new participant. Dr. Kim Jo-yoon understood the young man's concerns, but the result always requires some kind of sacrifice, and this time they are exactly like that. Besides, there was no point in worrying anymore. It would be impossible to get him out of the cell because Park Kite was already interested in him. Scientists are those who deny the existence of God, but ironically stand closest to him, such as their path. The specialist in charge of genetics appealed to the dark side of the blonde and seemed to be able to get a fairly eloquent answer from her. The experiment continued. The bitten man was taken out and moved to a more suitable place where he could become number 2. A huge number of doctors were monitoring his condition, ready to record any change. The table of the condition of the male test subject looked good. The symptoms were typical for all infected people. Everything was the same as always. No cough, and the heart muscle was hypertrophied by hormones, but there was something wrong. Dr. Kim, who turned to Professor Park, noticed that for the former, everything was arranged a little differently. The blonde himself had previously noted this too. By all measures, number 1 looked special. Perhaps it was worth looking for secrets in his body, although this was only the first experiment. An experienced worker asked if it would be possible to duplicate the virus that was once introduced to number 1. Pak replied that this was possible. Kim Jo-eun's phone suddenly rang. It was difficult to understand the essence of the dialogue piece by piece, but it became obvious to Park that something had happened. The government envoy called and told the doctor about a man who had contact with number 1 and is now in the department. The brunette also said that the patient's heart stopped several times, but was able to be restarted. After all attempts to revive the man, his brain eventually died and ARS-24 infection was confirmed. A worried Kim Jo-yoon ordered the worker to keep an eye on this new infected. He definitely had potential. It was especially worth keeping an eye on if somehow the man from the hospital managed to come back to life, after which the conversation was over. Meanwhile, the main character decided not to miss the opportunity and took some sample from the patient in order to create a vaccine in the future. When the patient's pulse was restored, Hen felt as if he had become the first to conquer Olympus, but in the end everything ended in failure. The patient's things were right there, so the young man decided to take a look, and among them he found something that reminded him of the old days. Then they had a great time, and the professor glowed with life so brightly that no one could stop him on this path. And now there is a high probability that he will turn into the same monster that Park Ki-tae is. The guy understood that giving into emotions at such a moment would be an unforgivable mistake because a lot depends on him. A message came to the main character's phone. It was Detective Oyeri. She wanted to know if everything was okay because he had not appeared for a long time. The situation was difficult, so the young man offered to meet and talk if the girl had such an opportunity. He was glad to see her, but there were many matters worth discussing. The detective also wanted to be useful in their case. The guy handed the robe to his girlfriend, saying that thanks to this she would be able to not stand out when necessary. But Oyeri could not believe that the young man was giving her something valuable, which would give her quite unusual opportunities in their midst. The main character decided to share what he now has to cope with. His friend was infected during contact. The situation was similar. As in the case of the first infected person, the detective asked if any of the strangers could hear it. The probability was not high, but there was no exact data about this, so they could only move on. The guy warned that if they had already found out about what had happened, the detective would be at great risk if he got inside the building. The girl asked if there were any options to protect herself with it, because they definitely wouldn't get away with it, which means it's better to be prepared. The main character had one idea. Of course, he couldn't carry his friend in his arms like Kaneni, but he wants to take retaliatory measures. 3 hours later, the government worker decided to contact his agent to find out exactly how things were going. The main character was now in the room with the infected person, but before he entered, an alarm was triggered. Probably since this happened, the infected person died and then was able to return to life. This was great news. A capture group was quickly formed. Its task was to obtain the infected person and then deliver him to the right place. The operation was commanded by a friend of ours, who took the director out of the game. Everything was ready for the start of the capture operation. They only had 1 minute to get in and out, otherwise it would be impossible to hide it without leaving any traces. It was necessary to turn off the power at the signal, and after that, as soon as the lights turned off, go straight to the room. The doctor sitting inside did not suspect anything yet, but it was obvious to him that something similar could happen soon. The switch was pulled, so the operation was officially started. They had about 1 minute before it was over. The power outage was a disaster for the hospital, so doctors quickly organized to bring him back. But before anyone could take any action, men in black with batons ran into the building. They knew very well the location of the chamber they needed, so they headed in the right direction without any doubt. If the doctor began to resist, it was worth knocking him out. There was enough time left. These guys were the best of the best. The doors were open. Even the doctor showed up. Everything went according to plan, as the soldiers wanted, but they did not take into account one factor. The professor may have looked weak, but even a man like him had his own trump cards up his sleeve, which he decided to play. The blow from the back with the baton was blocked by a strong file, which greatly surprised the shadow warrior. After which Hen was ready to demonstrate the blow with which, while playing worms, he threw hundreds of other players' worms into the water. However, the low hook is not the only greeting. Detective Oyeri also showed what she is capable of. The blow indicated that it was not an ordinary civilian against them. The technique, speed, and force of the reception were too accurate. The main character noted that his opponent probably had the experience of feeling a good blow. He planned to knock him out with one blow. The defense team was ready to stand to the last. His red bandages and loud statement spoke of this. Clenching his fist tightly, Hen was ready to fight, even if after this he would lose his position and several teeth. With the second blow, he knocked the club out of the attacker's hands while he could not understand what the fuck was going on and how to deal with it. With the third blow, the young man wanted to put an end to this confrontation because there were still many opponents ahead. Another soldier hit him on the head with a baton from behind, but the guy was undergoing anti-shock training with Makunuchi Ippo. He didn't care. Not noticing any reaction, the guy in black became confused. Then the detective, not wanting to lag behind, dealt a crushing blow. The opponents had only 26 seconds left before the lights were turned on again. They had to hurry, otherwise they would have to write explanatory notes. Realizing that there would most likely not be enough time, the enemy decided to retreat to try again later. The guys, surprised by such a simple victory, did not understand why it all ended so quickly, but the blackout was definitely connected with them. Dr. Kim Jo-yoon received the report and was very furious at how the mission ended. He expected to get a new infected person. His reaction suggested that the government employee's track record would not be what he would have liked. It was impossible to suppress this, and besides, it was not possible to pick up the infected person earlier because Dr. Hen arrived almost immediately. Professor Park, who was watching this, did not even know what he should say in this situation, but he was again faced with a choice. Then Kim said to use any methods and means to catch him, but it was necessary to get a unique infected person. The blonde suddenly realized exactly how it all happened, so he stood up from his chair so quickly that it fell to the floor. The infected professor contracted ARS-24 while trying to calm number 1 down. There was a small wound on his fist. Park Won-sung finally understood who he was talking about. Lee Sun-kyu turned out to be infected. He was not ready to watch his friend become a monster. The young man shared this with his senpai. Kim Jo-yoon was really surprised, but it could give them a clue. The strangest thing is that the main character himself was involved in 2 incidents. Either his luck was with him or he guessed something. A coffee break saved many people at work. These 2 were no exception. He thought for a long time about what exactly was different. Their patient could not become number 2. Although in theory they were now able to recreate the necessary conditions, something was still missing. Then, looking at his hand, Kor Kim realized that the principle of infection was different. Too much of the virus entered the body with the bite. They have finally seen their guiding star. The key to a successful transformation is a small amount of the virus. The difference between those infected is how long the stages take. With a bite, everything happens too quickly. A virus is like a parasite. Its main job in the body is to survive, so Dr. Park's theory could work. It is likely that Lee Sun-kyu turned to exactly the one they wanted, due to the fact that he only had contact with the infected person for a moment. Even if it was hard to believe, knowledge, experience, and other experts suggested that it was really possible. In this case, it's as if they deliberately made a mistake in the design in order to change the result. Who knows? Maybe there are other options. Now the team could move towards the ideal. They would be able to realize their goal and would be able to start buzzing with the best of their creations if necessary. China watched everything that happened from the side. They saw how their intervention then affected the enemy. Agnet Zhangwei asked his colleague Horan if there was any progress in their research or if nothing had changed. It was difficult to answer this question, but the zeal with which they transported new raw materials for super soldiers spoke of success. Now was not the right time to harvest no matter how much I wanted to. Agent Heron was thinking about taking number 1 at that time, but decided not to do so yet, albeit if the presentation was too early. The Chinese forces involved in this operation then were used in vain. This could not be allowed to happen. The man asked his colleague to analyze all the messages and calls that came and went. It is necessary to at least roughly find out how ready everything is for the Korean forces. Otherwise, the surprise for the authorities will be unpleasant. In the morning, the experiments continued. They decided to use a small amount of the monster's blood as the cause of infection. Several suitable people were selected. All of them were participants in this experiment. Now they will be wounded and then infected with ARS-24. Baldy woke up earlier than the others, so he was very worried about what was happening around him. He did not understand how he ended up here. 2 evil scientists watched what was happening through the glass. They hoped to achieve success this time. Any of the 4 prisoners may be needed, and perhaps they can make their own fantastic 5 monsters. Dr. Kim knew bringing in a hormone specialist like Park Won-sang was the right decision, and they moved forward with his fresh perspective. Initially, there were doubts about him, but the guy showed how crazy he is, an ominous scientist, there's no other way to put it. At night, Professor Lee Sun-kyu began to move. His fingers, just like the fingers of the first infected, began to move. In the morning on the roof of the hospital, the main character decided to tell his assistant a little, but it seems that he is too talkative for everything. He could not believe that something like this was happening just in their city and country, because this was a real moral crime. The main character mentioned how difficult it is to carry such information in your head, and also reminded how dangerous it can be. This should be left a secret. Potentially any hospital employee could be on the enemy's side, which means they can't trust anyone. Hen asked Kohai to think about the fact that getting out of the isolation ward is an incredibly difficult thing, and at the same time escaping from the hospital undetected. In addition, someone allegedly accidentally erased the camera recordings. It all looked incredibly suspicious, so it was worth being quieter. If you think about it a little, it became obvious that someone definitely supported the monster, but why and for what purpose? The virus is spread by a bite, and besides, it causes something similar to rabies, in short, the default zombie build from any movie. The assistant was truly surprised, although Hen was already beginning to doubt his decision because the guy's level of seriousness was too low. But in fact, the guy really couldn't believe it. Dr. Hyun himself had learned so much, but he still hadn't been caught. After finishing the conversation, the colleagues planned to go to Professor Lee Sun-kyu. He could not be left for long. As soon as they returned, the dead man stood up. They prepared in advance and chained his hand to the fence with a belt. However, even after infection, the man's consciousness did not go away, unlike those who were previously infected in the village. True, even though he came to his senses, he was not very comfortable in this belt, so he asked to take it off. But Jovan could not do this, which he told the mentor he respected so much. The man believed that his condition was more than acceptable for a walk, and besides, he considered everything that happened to be the consequences of a cold. Then turning to his friend, the main character asked him where they were right now. Not very confidently, but Professor Q suggested that this was an infection center. There were no cameras or listening devices inside. Hen probably could have intimated his old acquaintance to the hell that was happening. The guy asked to listen to him carefully and not to interrupt, after which he informed Professor Lee that he was infected with the ARS-24 virus. However, the man could not believe it. It seemed to him that this was really an ordinary illness and not something so serious. Hyun then asked if Lee remembered the symptoms of a patient named Park Ki-tae, whom the main character had previously treated. The guy explained that all the results, indications, symptoms, and results were consistent with that patient, with virtually no differences. It may be difficult to believe, but this is an inevitability that is reality. One can only accept it. There was a large bruise on the man's chest, because he had been undergoing heart massage for many hours, just so that he would return and give back the money he borrowed from Hen. The young man also said that Lee Sun-kyu had been dead for 2 days, but now miraculously came to life again. The man wanted to know the whole situation. Then our main character explained, "It's still an early stage, they will probably be able to do something. It has not yet been possible to come up with something that could cure or at least notice the transformation, but now they can try." The whole situation was very depressing for the man, because there was so much he had not done yet, but it was also too early to give up. There were simply no options left that they had not considered. After studying Park Ki-tae for a long time, they failed to achieve success. Then Professor Lee Sun-kyu asked if he could help with this research in any way. If so, he would be very happy. After 20 minutes, the main character collected another capsule of blood. If they want to save their friend, they will have to make a vaccine. The first thing they should start with now is a blood test. The patient asked to eat because he had breakfast so long ago. Even though there was little time, if there is any possibility of saving the professor, then the answer lies in his body. The young man had had a lot going on lately, so he was glad to meet his brother in their favorite place. Woo-sik came late again. They haven't seen each other for a long time, although due to everything that's going on and the anime about Frieren, time has flown by. However, the clerk's condition was quite sad. Due to worries and insufficient sleep, his bags were bluer than water. The guy told his brother that everything was fine with the commissioner, but the director never showed up. This was probably the end for him. The test was quite complex. It was similar to others in many ways, but at the same time different. The test results are improving, but this is unlikely to be enough to defeat the zombie virus. Otherwise, there would be no need to rack your brains. The main character also talked about what he learned from Dr. Park, as well as everything that happened to him in recent days. Very upset by Professor Q's hospitalization, the guy asked if everything was okay with him. Knowing Woo-sik's character, the main character asked him not to worry, deciding to tell everything the moment he was ready. The box contained extra blood, but the guy said it was Park Ki-tae's blood, not Lee's. There were quite a lot of samples. This could help them solve the problem, but it was still a long time before their plan was completed. It's lucky that infected number 1 and Provoster Lee Sun-kyu have the same blood types, otherwise the whole truth would have to be told. Now the main character was worried about what exactly was meant. The director left the game. Woo-sik replied, "Nothing is known now, but now he no longer appears in sight. Perhaps something happened or he is just passing through Skyrim." Even though things weren't going well for the boys, stopping there was a bad idea, so they should have moved on. Hen had a lot to do, so his brother suggested that he go their separate ways, but asked him to call him because now they are all in the same boat. A lot of things to do and constant duty. Because of this, the young man did not leave the hospital for 3 whole days. But despite what they agreed with Park Won-sang, he didn't even leave a note. It was quite strange. Then it dawned on the main character. All these days he had not seen the blonde man at all. For 3 whole days he had not seen the man who worked with him in the block. Everything accelerated after that attack. The amount of work in the infectious diseases department and the strange behavior of those around them, it seems they were once again set up. It was too suspicious that the raid to capture Professor Q and the absence of Dr. Park Won-sang happened on the same day. It would be foolish to consider their results to be insignificant. They are definitely achieving their goal, and the situation with the second infected person affects this. Did he find out something so terrible that now he can't leave their organization, or did he willingly become a part of it, betraying Hen? Only one fact is obvious. The sample of the first infected person is being actively studied. They probably found the answer to their question and now want to see the effect. Most likely the process sped up because the blonde talked about how Professor Q was infected. Does the guy need help? Information has not been received for too long to now somehow judge what is happening inside this hospital. It was necessary to stop this before everything became 10 times more global and dangerous. Otherwise, we could put an end to this world. After thinking a little, the guy decided not to cut himself off for now, because he remembered the commissar. Maybe he's the one Hen is looking for now. But hardly anyone can answer the question of how he was connected with all this now. It was worth trying to talk to him. Taking us to Dr. Pak's branch, it looks like he has already become friends with one of the guys at the origins of the project. And in the project, he himself began to occupy by no means regional roles. He even spoke to those who support the project from the state. They needed to make a presentation about how the research was going. The young man decided to start with the alpha virus. The solution they found allowed a person's strength to be displayed without affecting his mind, so much as to turn him into a mere monster. It was too early to talk about any stunning success, but now they are closer to the desired effect than ever before. An hour after infection, a person's heart stops and the body gradually begins to rebuild. As a result of all the changes, the body of the infected person takes on a form similar to that demonstrated by Mr. Olympia and his rivals. In fact, this is an opportunity to remove almost all restrictions from yourself, and the body also becomes extremely stable and resilient. If we talk about the potential of development as a weapon, then everything is more interesting here. The infected always strives to transmit the virus, and when the heart stops and is transferred to the hospital, the one who awakens from the changes will repeat the cycle, destroying the system from the inside. Thanks to Dr. Park joining the project, they were able to receive even more funding than expected. While no one knew what role China was playing in this spectacle, they were determined to take back what belonged to them. To do this, a small group observed those driving along the road to the hospital and collected various information from all sources. Unfortunately, ninja techniques are only available in Japan, so they had to use technological advancements to achieve this. After some time, the main character again decided to meet with his partner, Oyeri. Hen told her that he wanted to talk with the commissioner. However, he was a member of parliament, and it's not easy to get to him. But one way or another, they need someone from above. Private companies never disclose personal information without a warrant, so fulfilling the protagonist's request will be very difficult. Then the girl remembered the director with whom they had previously been in contact. He would probably be a more likely ally. True, this option is no longer relevant. Someone has already taken their potential ally out of the game, which means it was someone higher than him. The girl asked the professor himself to look into this issue. He has more useful connections than an ordinary detective. Entering the room where Professor Q was lying, the guy found a scene where it seemed that the symptoms were gradually beginning to appear. The man's appetite was extremely high, and his aggression was growing as if he was saving it for one blow, like Seth from the League of Legends. In addition to the constant desire to eat, anger, and fatigue, the man was also very afraid. They had little time left. The young man asked all employees to leave the ward. He promised to deal with this situation on his own. Hen had already said earlier that the situation is very complicated, and if something happens, the professor should contact the young man directly. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that the behavior of the second infected person was different from that demonstrated by Park Kite. It was as if the infection had been accelerated by something. It took several months to reach this stage number 1, but here barely a week had passed. The main character handed over an energy bar, but this was too little in what the man said because he was tormented by hunger. Now anger was caused by almost any movement, high temperature, and lack of TV. The only way the guy could help his friend was to prescribe him the same medicine that he then gave to the first infected person. Professor Lee Sun-kyu's eyes became red. Like those people from the village, steam was coming from his mouth. He could hardly be called soft. The urge to bite Hen's hand continued to intensify, the man using all his strength to try to restrain himself. The guy was worried about his colleague and friend, so he wanted to help him take his medicine, but it seemed that now was not the best time. The professor grabbed his hand. It was not clear whether he wanted to bite him, or in this way was only protecting him from what could happen. The main character was able to snatch his palm out of his grip. It was really worth taking the medicine. The sedative never bothered anyone. The patient asked whether the doctor would remain in the hospital today, but the young man said that another person would look after Lee in the evening. He asked where Hen was going since he could not tell all the details. The doctor told only a little of his plans. Having finally overpowered the monster within and done it in just a few frames, unlike Naruto or Itadori, the man promised to hold on. Detective Oyeri was already waiting for the main character outside. She looked quite brutal, a new candidate for waifu. The young man was completely immersed in his thoughts. He had a great responsibility, and he did not know how to speed up progress. But even so, he did not plan to give up. What his dear friend was now forced to fight was much more difficult. Having arrived at the place, the guys hid behind the car for some time, thinking that it could be a setup. They had not seen the director for a very long time, and now he suddenly showed signs of life. It could well be a trick of the enemy. Suddenly, the man left the room. His appearance left much to be desired. A dead look and unkempt appearance were the first to catch your eye. While the director was throwing out the trash, the main character approached him from behind and called the man's name. As soon as he did this, the man standing in front of him, as if in a cartoon, began to slowly fall down. After waiting for the director to regain consciousness, Hyun asked for forgiveness. He did not expect that the effect would be so strong. The man talked about how he has been reacting sharply to everything lately. He has become too sensitive after the incident. The guy asked Woosik how to contact the director, and he advised him to come home to talk. Before telling, the man opened another can of intoxicating drink. Now he can hardly help with anything. The main character did not think so, because despite his current state, the man still had influence and importance. It was difficult to imagine what exactly had to happen to a person to bring him to such a desperate state. The director was interested in what the young man and his team managed to find out. Perhaps now the man is out of shape, but he wants to help. Then Oyeri began the story. After the incident, a large number of events related to the infection occurred in the hospital. Straining his memory, all that came to the man's mind was the face of the government representative who caught him that day. As soon as he remembered what had happened, his determination to listen to the guys and the desire to join the game again abruptly evaporated. The man did not understand why Hen and Oyeri were doing this, because it was so dangerous and they were unlikely to be able to do anything against the government. But giving up just because the chances were small was not part of their plan. Before that, they wanted to try everything possible. Seeing the determination of his colleagues in misfortune, the director nevertheless decided to say a few words. They could be understood in different ways. Still, after drinking the buff potion, the man was ready to listen to those who decided to tell him about the current state of affairs. As soon as the main character spoke about what they knew at the moment, the director's situation made it clear which side he was on. He was sure that it was impossible to take control of the virus. Any mistake would end in the end of the world. But Hen added that there are madmen ready for such things. It's hard to believe, but things are really bad. As a doctor and a person, the main character does not want to ignore this. The youth's friend Park Won-sang and other experts from various fields, as well as many people from the government, are involved in this. Now people are divided into two camps. Some want to use the virus as a mass weapon. Others want to save the world from this miracle. If you just wait, sooner or later everything can end badly, and not only in case of an error, its use will also put an end to it. Understanding all this, thinking about the consequences as well as the fact that he would still be killed during the purge of witnesses, the director finally made up his mind. After 4 days at the presidential apartment, a VIP person, the same ruler as Shadow Ribito, his opinion is law for many. Sitting at his desk, the man watched as the next batch of prisoners became infected. The virus has mutated, gradually accelerating the period of activation of its symptoms. Previously, it took 182 hours. Now only 170 are needed. The president received a call from the same Park Tae-sik, the commissar, who said that he had important information and wanted to share it. A guy we know asked us to ignore him further if the president is not interested in hearing about the option that recently surfaced. The guys and the director waited for the commissar. As Hen had originally planned, they managed to get in touch with him. The man slowly walked inside the establishment. He was surprised to see his friend there. There were rumors that he even died. Then the employee said that even though a lot of time had passed, he was ready to return to this game right now. Seeing such confidence and not the least people next to the man, the commissar was ready to listen to what they wanted to tell him. The director decided to start from afar, mentioning the situation in the village some time ago, where the infected were brought from. Previously, the police chief suggested that the increased interest in this virus was due to the desire to turn it into a weapon. He was interested in how much reliable information the team knew. Perhaps by combining the knowledge, they would be able to find the truth. Then the main character decided to share. His friend Park Won-sang joined that team and decided to share some information. Also, as evidence, the guy provided a video from that very raid, where he repeated the fight between Saitama and Boros with one of the attackers. The video did not give much, but some words and the very fact of the invasion already spoke volumes. Probably their enemy was collecting data about the first number. Since Professor Park most likely won't get in touch in the near future, they don't have any new information. Moreover, if they now know quite a lot, how much useful information can the commissioner himself obtain? After thinking a little, the man made a decision. He agrees to cooperate and exchange information. But what will they do next? He also asked not to give away their cooperation and not to take too many risks because, as in the case of a virus, they are finished after the first mistake. It was quite easy to obtain new data and even find out about those who belong to the project. The commissioner already had their dossiers in his hands. The man also contacted Park Won-sang for information, but was denied a personal meeting. While Park Tae-sik was sorting out the data, his assistant brought a letter from Professor Wang. He was probably being followed, so it just happened that way. The blonde's words confirmed what the main character and his team had previously told the man. It seemed like a lot of interesting things were happening behind the scenes. Secretary of State Jong conducted an investigation, but everything was as Hyun said. Park Won-sang did not appear on any of the lists. Although now it didn't matter, because the commissioner had already agreed to meet with the president. The next day, walking along the red carpet, the president felt like something like Tony Stark, but the mood was a little spoiled. The commissar was already waiting for the man in the negotiation room. The man was glad to see the head of state again. The last time they sat like this, the man was 10 years younger, or maybe even 20 in any case. He had something to show. The conversation will be quite confidential, so the doors were locked behind the president's back and he slowly walked towards the chair. The commissioner understood that the president was very busy, but he could sometimes devote a little time to his subordinates. Not an ounce of concern on the man's part, he simply placed all the papers right in front of the boss, asking what he was doing here. All the evidence and specific names of those who were behind everything that was happening were on hand. Publish them, and a scandal would begin. In addition, it was obvious that without help from the highest ranks of the state, it was impossible to implement something like this. Everything became obvious. Having finished his monologue, the man slowly approached the president, waiting to see what exactly his opponent would answer. Then the VIP asked why. Knowing all this, the commissioner simply came to him and did not begin to take any action. Grinning a little, the man said that for his silence, he wanted to receive special powers during the next elections. 2 hours later, Commissioner Park Tae-sik was ready to leave, wanting to get an answer as soon as possible, otherwise something unpleasant would happen. The head of state followed his subordinate with a silent gaze until a tall figure appeared behind him. The man was glad that the guest he had invited had finally arrived. It seemed that the answer to the blackmail was already ready. The head of the agents of the National Government Group, he provided the data that the president asked for. It seems that the commissioner has become a problem. The video was not ours, but it turned out to be very interesting. In it, the main character with his team and the commissioner were sitting at the table. It didn't take long to figure out the identities of the people, and also to understand who among them posed the greatest threat to the project. The blonde asked to entrust the solution to this problem to him because he knows the answer to those bastards who forget where their place is. The commissioner sat in his apartment, sipping a sweet grape drink, anticipating how soon he would rule over other people. In honor of such a significant day, the man opened 30-year-old grape juice to celebrate this occasion. I would like to do this more often. The man was amazed at himself, since he was able to tuck even the most influential person in their country under his belt, at how great a future awaited him. However, before his dreams come true, the elderly man noticed that his glass was being filled by a very dubious person in black. It seems that, unlike the commissioner himself, the blonde man knows how to keep his word, so he sorted out the problem, as he promised the president. One of the agents believed that their boss had gone too far on this task, because after all, they were dealing with one of the high ranks. Then the boss corrected him, saying that all this was done on purpose as a gift from a VIP, unforgettable and unique. After Park Tae-sik himself was dealt with, they decided to blame the main character and Detective Oyeri for his murder. The body of the deceased was taken to the forest, and they were ready to leave it there. Then everything looked quite realistic, especially thanks to the help of their captain. Captain Huang could not contain his joy, that very soon they would frame those who went against the system. Soon they dealt with the director. In his house, everything happened according to a similar scenario. They were warned to check the cameras before leaving. Everything was almost ready. The fingerprints of the main character had already been received, so soon there would be enough evidence to put them in jail. Gradually narrowing the net, one of the characters in Hell's Paradise was happy that everything was going smoothly, and without unnecessary stress, this bastard loved that kind of thing. The man also said that they should bring another person to Park Tae-sik's house, since the guy would not open the doors himself. A message came to the main character's phone asking him to come to the specified address at any time. The sender had an important message. It was impossible to contact either the director or even the commissioner himself. Everything seemed very strange and unrealistic. The main character also contacted the detective. There was a smell of something fried, so he walked slowly and carefully looked at the freaks. They agreed to meet with Oyeri, and before that, Hen went to stores and pharmacies to make sure of his theory. Following the main character, one of those who stormed the hospital was very dissatisfied. The failure and reprimand happened precisely because of him. At the time of the fight, the doctor looked like an inhuman, and the force of his blows, according to the captain, was amazing. You definitely had to be careful with him. The guy gradually began to descend into the subway. It was dangerous to follow, so the young man in black contacted the coordinator. Changing surveillance was not a problem. Agents were located throughout the city, so Hen would not go anywhere, even if they lost sight of him. Having met his girlfriend, he briefly explained the situation. Everything was a little tense, so the guy suggested walking slowly. The main character also showed a phone with a photo. He was definitely being followed, using military-like camouflage for this. The guy followed the rule and turned right 3 times, went into several stores, but even so, this eccentric followed on his heels. Every time he stopped somewhere, the stranger made a stop too. It's easy to guess that this tale comes from his apartment. The girl suggested that since Professor Hen was being followed, and before that they had written to him to come somewhere, this could be a trap. The enemy may seem stupid, but he was very careful, so they had to pretend that they did not realize about the surveillance. A little later, the young man agreed with the words of his partner. Everything really looked like an ordinary trap, and there was probably more to come. It seems that their patrons were sorted out first. The protagonist's intelligence often helped him out, but his intelligence did not always help. The commissioner could be caught trying to do something with the information they had previously given him. That would be enough. And the fact that the director went against the system had been known for a long time, so he was finally removed so as not to interfere. The girl certainly wasn't a good turn-based strategy player, but her experience in Warcraft 3 told them they better not act without a plan. Even though their hands were practically tied now, Hen was able to come up with the ideal option for their situation. He decided to share it. Entering the first floor of the apartment a few tens of minutes later, the guys did not know that the blonde man was watching them through the cameras. He wanted the main character to pay for all the information that he had so diligently collected and then so stupidly given away. However, something went wrong right in front of the elevator. The young man and his girlfriend pretended to have quarreled and she left. Then a few minutes later, the situation for the forces of darkness became even worse. A civilian rose up to them. The whole plan could have gone downhill. The door ahead was open, so the unsuspecting man decided to go inside and check if everything was okay. The guys called for delivery to the address proposed for the meeting, indicating that payment would be made on the spot. The courier arrived on time, so the main character called out to him and asked if everything was okay inside the house or not. The door was open, so the young man was a little worried, but he had not yet had time to look in, so he did not know about the situation inside the house. Having offered to open them, the main character waited to see what trap they had prepared for them. The solution was truly ingenious. The courier asked for forgiveness and decided to open it, because he had a delivery and could not hesitate. He is not Peter Parker to fly with pizza. True, a not very pleasant surprise was waiting for him inside. The commissar's body was lying on the floor. The courier did not know how he should react. He quickly stepped back as soon as he saw the body of a wounded man, but he could not simply leave the scene of the crime. The team of agents panicked a little, because they didn't know what they should do this time. Such embarrassments didn't happen often. But instead of making a decision, the boss made it clear what would happen to the agent if the assigned task was not completed. The only solution that the man saw in this situation was to contact their superiors, because it would hardly be possible to resolve it otherwise. The boss's anger was so strong that it managed to cause the paper to be destroyed, all because there was a civilian on the scene. The second call was that it was not possible to identify this civilian at the moment due to the helmet on his head. It seemed like the main character was several steps ahead of his opponent. Even though it wasn't chess, Hen was still in check. The plan the blonde came up with was to give a few headshots, and then hush the matter up as if nothing had ever happened. Because of such an accident, all plans went to waste, to remove witnesses of their state secrets and the witness of an attempt to remove the witness. It all seemed complicated, but the truth was one. If Huang didn't handle this, then the truth might be out there. The only effective option was to solve the problem with your own hands. The blonde ordered his men to get ready because they were going into action. Having transformed into Ichigo Kurosaki for one frame, Huang ordered everyone to complete the mission no matter what it takes, otherwise they will all be screwed. The detective went up to the body to examine it. It looked like someone was really trying to frame the guys, but who and what jokes were still to come. Now it was worth calling the police, which is what the people present here did. It seems that the situation for the forces of darkness was only getting more complicated. While the protagonist Nakama was talking about what had happened, he was guessing how their enemies would try to get rid of them again. In the distance, some familiar but not very clear sound was heard. Looking into the dark distance, Hen tried to understand what would happen soon. The courier was very worried because he didn't know what would happen to him, but Oyeri asked him to calm down and just wait for the cops to arrive. Turning sharply, the guys saw that the main character had locked the doors and did not let them out even for a second, using more and more strength. There was no time, so they wanted to open the doors as soon as possible. If the police saw them, the VIP would knock the strike out of them all. Even though the lock gave way, the doors were blocked with various things from the house on the backside. It would be extremely difficult to get inside. The situation was difficult, but armed with a floor lamp, the main character was ready to fight back despite the enemy's numerical advantage. The group leader was notified of what was happening. Then he decided to take action on his own by sticking his hand into the hole and breaking the chain. It seems that of all those nearby, this was the strongest person, but the courier gradually found himself lower and lower. His legs were trembling. Having called everyone they could, they asked to come to the crime scene in order to gain at least some advantage. They should have found a safer place. Soon the enemy would pass inside, barely managing to defend themselves against 10 assassins at once. Huang and his guys went inside faster than the main character expected. There was no time to prepare, so it had to be won. There was no time to get to the enemy, so the local Bakugo sent his kunai at the main character. Even though the boy was an ordinary doctor, reflecting him with the help of the lower part of the lamp was not difficult. Everything was fine, only the courier knight passed out. They needed to hurry, so the main character grabbed him by the collar and pulled him along. Without waiting for the rubble to be cleared, Huang jumped over the fence and ran after Hyun and his team. Time was running out. As soon as the man looked around the corner, one of the doors in front of him closed. They would probably repeat the same trick again. The guys asked the courier to stay away from the battle. Under no circumstances should he die, because then everything would be in vain. It was much easier to go inside at Huang's this time, because the entrance doors are much stronger and heavier. It was easy to knock this one down. The government hunter went inside. He said with a proud expression that the escape had finally ended. Now there was no escape from it. The only thing that remained was to hold out long enough for the police to arrive, or for those who had previously been invited to this gathering to come. The noise in the apartment was too loud. So many people came to complain, and moreover, the number of people quickly grew and this could not continue. But even despite the fact that there were many witnesses a few meters away, Huang was literally burning with hatred. He was like Sasuke, and Hen was like Itachi. Soon another courier arrived at the scene, as well as the police. They did not understand what kind of pogrom had been carried out, but soon they saw the body. Trying to find his friend, the guy in the helmet went deep into the rooms, where he finally met Knight, the main character, and Oyeri. He decided to clarify what was going on, but explaining it in a nutshell was too problematic, so for now there was only one version. Hen talked about the men in black and was very surprised that the courier did not meet them. The elevator was broken, according to him, so he walked. Soon, more police arrived on the scene, as well as Hyun's subordinate from his work. He had been keeping an eye on Professor Q all this time. The main character looked quite tired. It seemed like a lot had happened during the time he spent within the walls of this apartment. He asked the attackers Hen and his friend, because he definitely wouldn't lie to him. But the green-haired one didn't see anything rising up. Suddenly, in the distance, the sound of an elevator descending was heard. It was strange, especially considering its malfunction. Since no one saw them, the attackers probably disappeared into the elevator. This would explain the lack of witnesses. Then who helped them? In order not to get burned in the cells, a detachment of black warriors led by Schroeder changed clothes. They needed to blend in with the crowd. Huang also ordered one of his guys to start the car faster. They should hurry up and quickly escape from this place. He ordered his men to get into the car immediately after they left the building. A lot of people gathered around. They could be caught. However, the fact that he had already been disgraced twice by some doctor greatly infuriated Huang, and he promised to take revenge on him. The couriers standing in front of the complex were waiting for Knight and their Nakama, when suddenly they saw people in all black who came out of the building. One of the guys decided to take a photo just in case, but at the same time forgot to turn off the sound, which gave him away. These people seemed suspicious. The courier understood that they could not do anything because there were cameras around, which means he won. All that remained for the guys in suits was to simply leave. They had already been outplayed 3 times. Apparently, VIP would soon begin recruiting a new team of agents. The squad leader's rage gradually exceeded all limits. He was even redder than the Ursa during the ult. Huang and his men flew into the black car like a bullet. He ordered the driver to press the gas pedal with all his might. The worst thing awaited the blonde ahead. Now he will somehow have to justify himself to the president, otherwise his head will be blown off. A group of brave couriers did not dare to leave this unattended. They followed, wanting to help out their friend and catch the criminal. The people pursuing Huang and his squad were civilians, which means it was impossible to just touch them. It was impossible to answer now. The chase continued for quite a long time. Soon a police car joined in. It seems their race attracted a lot of attention. A lot of time has already passed since the last time they ran away from the police, but their hands remember, so they went in different directions. Detective Kim Il-young investigated the case, and there was another person with him, and they carefully examined the victim's body. The people sitting behind were suspects. Among them was the same courier Knight, the main character, and his girlfriend Oyeri. It was Hen who looked the strangest. Unlike the other young man, he was calm and silent, as if he was used to such situations. The murder weapon was also found fairly quickly. The size of the wounds and the size of the knife looked similar, which means it was probably it. The situation was quite strange. There were no attempts at resistance, but as many as 10 blows were struck. If you use such a knife with such force and frequency, scars will definitely remain on your hand. It is impossible to avoid it. The investigation into the case continued. Detectives tried to find out what happened at the scene because everything looked somehow unnatural. One of the workers suspected the main character, so he tried to impersonate him using various tricks, including calling. However, taking the recordings from the cameras of the house, it was clear that the 2 of them and the girl entered the building when the man had already died. Of course, this was a fact, but the killer could simply return to the scene of the crime. Even Sherlock Holmes himself spoke about this. It was obvious that someone lured the main character and the girl, because they closed the doors and clearly did not try to escape from the place. Everything was too complicated, and the case would definitely become a target for all the reporters once they took care of this matter. The detective approached the suspects and asked them not to share information about the investigation to avoid unnecessary difficulties. A little later, they met up with one guy to tell him about the situation that had happened. It seemed they were now out of the enemy's blind spot. Earlier, Wusik was looking at him. It was Detective Lee Jin-ho. Oyeri called him earlier so that he would come to their rescue if something happened. It was unsafe to stay at home. If the enemy made an attempt on their life, then they should have chosen a crowded place to rest. The camera on Knight's body helped a lot. Thanks to it, the detectives let Hen and the girl go because it was clear that they did nothing. It was difficult to imagine who could be involved in this. Hardly anyone would have the courage to kill a high-ranking official. They have one advantage. The courier shared this with him. His friends filmed what was happening and suspicious people as well. Before the police take it, it will be uploaded to the cloud, so the evidence cannot be hidden so easily. Meanwhile, things were not so calm in the president's office. Those driving behind were able to catch up with the VIP secretary. They were tracked down, but they simply could not solve this problem as they did before. In fact, the name Bastards is the best for their squad. Since too many people now know about what happened, they should transport all the samples of the infected and the infected themselves. The investigation continued. Max Pei could not leave this case. It was obvious that this was organized crime. His partner found Hen's prints on the knife, but his boss reminded him that when a knife is stabbed, it should be held firmly and not lightly touched. It was a real pain to get all the videos, and the situation with the courier seriously affected the police. In general, they had a lot of work. Knight's camera shows that the main character has nothing to do with it, since his traces may be on the knife itself if he did not touch it. Someone published something very suspicious on the internet. The detective didn't even immediately believe it, but they won't show it to us yet. The next morning after a hard night, the main character woke up in a soft bed. He didn't have to go to work, so it was heaven. He spent the night in the apartment of that freaky guy in Panama. He let him in for the night so that the main character would not take risks at home. Oyeri was also with them. She woke up before everyone else and managed to take a shower, although the bachelor pad was not very comfortable. The girl asked whether her nakama had serious injuries, but Hen escaped with only a few dozen scratches. She was interested in what plans they had now. The project managers were now aware of them. It was unlikely that they would just abandon them. Someone as powerful as the commissioner has died. Can they just wait for the results of the investigation without doing anything about it? Because of the noise, their friend also woke up. He agreed with the girl's opinion, because simply waiting for your fate is not the best solution. Moreover, if someone from the government is behind everything, their inaction will only give them a free hand, which means they will soon see a game over. A detective called the main character's phone. He was more delicate than L, so he did not decide to get a job with him. He was interested in whether they could meet in the near future. He had several questions that he would like to discuss. Detective Kim Il-young was quite popular. Besides, he always fought for justice. He should help in this matter. In addition, reflecting on what happened, Oyeri noticed some inconsistencies, which means they can justify themselves. An investigator came to the scene. He seemed a little puzzled, but his friends asked the guy to be calmer, so he decided to do so. The detective apologized for being late. He had to walk, and besides, it's quite hot now. Without waiting a minute, Hen immediately decided to find out what they wanted to ask him about, because now it was of primary importance. Then the man explained that the commissioner was killed with a kitchen knife, and the fingerprints of the main character were found on the murder weapon. The girl was the first to be indignant, because she is also a peace officer and can guarantee that her friend did not even touch the knife. However, there was something suspicious. Just a few days ago, the fingerprint of the main character was registered at the police station. Then Detective Kim Il-young asked a colleague if she knew Detective Oh, also known as Jang Daeok-soo. But this was impossible, because Detective Oh, who entered Hyun's print into the database, was already dead for a long time, and it was because of this that doubts arose. The situation was really difficult. These two are quite significant in their city. One is a good doctor, the other is a talented investigator. The young man's phone received a call from the hospital. Detective Kim Il-young was not against him leaving. He had already told the basic information. The main character was worried whether there was someone to worry about if the call was so urgent. Then the assistant said, he called Hyun at the request of his friend Lee Soon-kyu. His condition had deteriorated sharply. The man's performance has become terrifying. His height has increased by 10 cm and his weight by 20 kg. He is gradually going through the process of transformation. The assistant brought the phone to the patient so that they could talk calmly. The friend said that he was able to become like Phil Heath. However, Hyun didn't really like such jokes. He asked his friend how he was feeling. Then Professor Q shared his opinion. Even though consciousness was normal, the irresistible desire to bite the main character did not disappear anywhere. It became stronger. Trying to find something good in the situation, the main character was glad that he was so tasty if they wanted to bite him so much. Everything became more and more dangerous, but Hen promised to hurry. The vaccine was already being prepared, so there was only a little time left to hold out. Although the young man's words should sound reassuring, for Lee Sun-kyu himself, they were not even close to that. He understood his situation. Now the guy was under suspicion, so he asked to hold out at least until the moment when he could escape his life sentence. Then the main character decided to call Park Won-sang, realizing that they could only succeed by working together, otherwise it wouldn't work out. He agreed with the blonde to meet at their usual place. Now was the best time for this. They are standing at the beginning of the end. In the evening of the same day, the guys met again on the landing. It seemed that Hen was glad to see his friend in health. The young man wanted to show Dr. Park something, so he called him down so he could see it. There was a recording on the phone of Professor Q, who was once again possessed by the virus. The situation was not the worst, but definitely far from ideal. The main character asked his friend to help fix what they were facing now, because otherwise their friend would not return. The guy couldn't hide the truth and told Hen right to his face that he helped improve the virus so that it would fit the requirements. It was all over. Now they had in their hands the perfect weapon of mass destruction that man could come up with. The guy couldn't forgive even his friend for this, because his diabolical development could easily destroy an entire nation. Regardless of what guarantees Park Won-sang himself might give, it was unacceptable to do something like this. But he broke that seal. Such a result could not be achieved quickly, which means the guy understood that his friend was one of those who experimented on the body. All this time, Hen was with a man who, with a wave of his hand, as if Johann Liebert could take the life of another person. In 3 days, there will be a movement of the object, an important moment, and Hen should be happy for him as a friend. It looks like he really is a monster. Now the blonde has officially become a member of the group. He will join in something so great that even the world will not be able to resist them. The order to move the facility to Namsan has already been given. Everything starts in 3 days. All infected, including the first one, will be moved. The main character still couldn't believe that his friend would do something like this. He was definitely out of his mind. It couldn't be otherwise. People planned to use all their strength to transport the infection to the center of Seoul and keep it there. The wording suggested that Park Won-sang would continue to work, even though he knew what a terrible thing he had created with his own hands. The young man could not squeeze out more than one word of support, despite the fact that the blonde had been his good friend for many years. The next day, the transportation of all samples began early in the morning. The entrances were blocked, and civilians certainly would not have known about the planned operation. The government envoy returns to history again. He oversaw this meeting, so his mood was already terrible in the morning. China has been waiting for this moment for so long, and now they can finally take revenge. One of the monsters they transported was definitely conscious. The plan to move the lab started earlier than they expected, so that was a bit of a challenge. But even so, people were ready to take their development and its improvement back. The mission would be carried out today during the move. The car drivers did not suspect anything. This working day promised to be the same as usual. The street was quite quiet. There was a lot of traffic, but this was normal for their country. The guys were happy to return to the center. The Chinese attack began unexpectedly. No one could have imagined that someone would attack hospital cars right in the city. The vehicles were quickly disabled. Even increased protection did not protect them from an accurate hit from an RPG. The state envoy got out of his car. He could not believe that such madness could happen. If the virus spreads in the city center, it will be a real tragedy, and they were not exactly destroyed by the government.